Okay, team, kia ora. Welcome to exercise physiology, the revision session. So I've put together this PowerPoint that sort of asks questions related to exercise physiology, and it's very indicative of what the exam's going to have, the content that's in the exam. The best way I think to use this will be to go through the PowerPoint, which is in Moodle, so not the recorded version, and put together your own answers for each of the questions. Some answers are in the PowerPoint, but try and word it in a way that you understand things, and then use this recorded version to sort of go through those answers and hear some discussion from me. And if anyone has any questions related to any of this, feel free to drop me an email and ask those questions. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so the first question we have is, after we digest and absorb nutrients from food, we must do something with those nutrients. And in the case of our macronutrients, we can use those to generate and reform energy. We can also use our macronutrients and our micronutrients to help build the body's components. And then we also need to excrete any of the unusable nutrients that we don't need. So the question here is, where is this potential energy in food stored? So if we think about those macronutrients, they are called macronutrients because they are needed in big quantities in our life, in our diet, and the other key thing is that they provide us with energy. So the food that we eat contains what we call potential energy, and that potential energy is stored in various types of chemical bonds that hold the different types of molecules that create these macronutrients. So mostly it's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But protein also has nitrogen as a part of those compounds. This potential energy can be then converted to what we call kinetic energy, which is a moving type of energy, and this helps us move and stay alive. So we've got potential energy, meaning it's stored and it has potential to do some work. The body then converts that and transfers that potential energy into kinetic energy, which is the energy that moves us and allows us to stay alive. Number two, when we break these chemical bonds that hold together the three main macronutrients, we can transfer this energy to regenerate ATP, which is the body's energy currency, and eventually we can do some work, and that work looks like us moving and metabolism. The question here is, explain what is meant by energy transfer. So the chemistry involved to transfer energy requires the breaking and reforming of bonds. So if we look at this molecule of ATP, we've got this adenosine, which is the green and blue structure, and then we've got these three phosphates or triphosphate, which are the purple P's. That collectively is like a biological battery. There's lots of energy between these three phosphates. A good way to think of it is having three kids in the back of your car, three siblings that generally, in a space like that, close together, there's a bit of tension between them, especially on long trips. That tension is, in this example, is energy. If we split that tension, we release some energy. This movement of energy is called energy transfer. So the key thing here is that we cannot make energy, we can only transfer it to something else. So energy can't come from nothing. We have to take it from somewhere else in a different form and then move it and repackage it or put it somewhere else. Question 3, the word lysis means to break down, loosen, or decomposition. So I just think breaking down, splitting, pulling apart. So anytime you see that word in a bigger word, it means we're talking about a process that is breaking down. So the question here is, describe what has been broken down by the following processes. So we've got hydrolysis, glycolysis, glycogenolysis, and lipolysis. And some of the prefix words, the words in front of lysis, will give you an idea of what has been broken down. Okay, so hydrolysis, hydro meaning water. Water molecules help the breakdown of ATP. So hydrolysis is the breakdown of ATP, so releasing energy. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose, so we know that that's part of the main function of the glycolytic system, splitting of a single glucose molecule. Glycogenolysis, so the first part of that word is glycogen. So glycogenolysis is the breakdown of glycogen, and remember that glycogen is the stored version of sugar or glucose, so it's our short-term storage in our muscles and in our liver. And then lipolysis, lipo, lipid, triglycerides, fats. So lipolysis, we're talking about the breakdown of fats. Lipo, you might think liposuction, sucking out fats from a body. Lipolysis, breakdown of lipids, triglycerides, or fats. Any of those three things would be correct and mean fats. Okay, question 4. We don't store a lot of ATP. If you had to store all of the ATP that you needed for the day, and this is if you weren't super active, you would need pretty much 75% of your own body weight of ATP stores, which is not practical to carry around. You only store about 80 to 100 grams of ATP, and that's just enough for a few seconds of intense effort. So once it runs out, we need to do something with it, and it's much easier for the body to make this as we go along. So question 4 is, what are the 3 pathways or energy systems that regenerate ATP? In your discussion, describe how quickly and how much ATP is regenerated by each. This is part of the long answer question, so having a bit of a breakdown of this question is really important in preparation for the long answer question. So after our ATP stores are used, which is only for a few seconds, we then have the ATP PCR system. That's when a broken down ATP, which is in the form of ADP, is restored by a phosphocreatine molecule, which we also have stored in our body. Repackages ATP really quickly, but it only happens in small amounts. So 1 ADP can be regenerated into ATP from 1 phosphocreatine or PCR. So really quickly, not a lot. And it actually doesn't sustain us for very long. You're talking maybe 10 seconds of intense exercise before the system is exhausted and the stores of creatine in your body have been depleted, and then that takes time to regenerate those stores. The second step, so this is a system that's happening in the background all of the time, but during intense bouts of exercise, this will be the predominant energy source for the next 90 seconds. So it's our glycolytic system. It's an anaerobic pathway, just like step 1, where we don't require oxygen. It's the really quick regeneration of ATP, again, only small amounts. So it's a little bit slower than the ATP PCR system, and it makes a little bit more ATP, but it's not much slower, and it doesn't make much more ATP. It's the breaking of a glucose molecule. I think it costs 2 ATP for that process to happen, and you can regenerate 4. So you're looking at having a net of 2 ATP from this process. And as you'll remember, there's a whole lot of byproducts that are also created from the system that can then be used to aerobically generate ATP. And if we are exercising hard and don't have enough oxygen, there is that buildup of fermenting pyruvate and that horrible lactic acid feeling. And that brings us to our oxidative system. It's really slow, but it can churn out large amounts of ATP. It can sustain us for hours, as long as we have the fuel sources, and the exercise output has to be really slow in order to be able to match the amount of ATP that is being produced. So this is our big generator of ATP. It needs oxygen, so this is an aerobic system, but it's really slow. Okay, question 5. The sum of all chemical reactions within our body is known as metabolism. So this includes all reactions that involve building up, breaking down the body, allowing us to function, sending messages. All of the chemical stuff happens, but most of these reactions turn our food that we eat into energy that our body can use or for storing later. So that's why metabolism is often thought of as the breaking down of foods. It's not only that, but it is a big chunk of that. Question 5 is describe what is being created by the following processes. So before we looked at breakdown, now we're looking at building up. And the body goes through this constant process of breakdown, build up. And remember that energy cannot be made from nothing. It has to be transferred from somewhere to something else. So here we're looking at the creation of bigger molecules from something smaller. Again, the prefix word or the word in front will help us describe what it is we're building, and genesis will mean like synthesis or build up. So glycogenesis, so if we look at the first word, a little bit like glycolysis, we are building up glycogen from glucose. So we're going the opposite of splitting. We're building up glycogen, or our short-term storage, from sugar molecules, from simple sugars. So let's say you've just eaten lunch and you've got excess glucose in your blood that is not being used right now. Glycogenesis will build up those single molecule glucose into something bigger called glycogen and store that in our muscles and our liver. Gluconeogenesis, so this is, think of the word neo as meaning new. This is the creation of glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. So let's say the opposite of my example above, you're actually in starvation mode, or you don't have glucose available and glycogen is depleted. Your body is actually able to create and restore blood glucose levels by creating glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. So we can build glucose and restore those blood glucose levels from things like fats, proteins, and some of the byproducts of glycolysis, so pyruvate, lactic acid. Protein synthesis, this one's quite easy. Synthesis means to create protein, creating protein. So we're building new proteins from amino acids, which are the building blocks of long strands of proteins. You've got about 20 different amino acids. Some are essential, meaning your body cannot make them, and you have to get them from your diet. And sort of, I think it's roughly half. And then the other half are non-essential, meaning your body can actually create these amino acids. So protein synthesis is the building up of proteins. So in the gym, when you're training, there is a series of protein breakdown, or catabolism, where it's breaking down, and then there's a process of recovery, restoration, where protein synthesis or anabolic synthesis happens of proteins building up. If that balances out and the breakdown is higher than the build-up, then you're actually going to lose muscle mass. On the flip side, if the recovery or the synthesis is higher than the breakdown, then you'll actually increase muscle mass. Lipogenesis, again, lipo, that similar word to meaning fats. So this is the buildup of triglycerides from fatty acids and glycerol. This is, or actually, which is not in here, any excess energy that the body has. So if we've got a lot of blood glucose, glycogen stores are full, and we're not using that energy source, the body can actually, through lipogenesis, build up and store triglycerides, our long-term storage in our adipose tissue and in muscle. Question 6, the two most important raw materials for making ATP are carbohydrates and fats. They're the two most important because they're the ones that the body can easily use through glycolysis and through oxidative phosphorylation or the oxidative system to generate ATP. But under some circumstances, and the body doesn't like to do this unless it needs to, we can actually use protein to regenerate ATP. Question 6 is give a summary of the functions of each macronutrient in the body. So, for example, protein isn't used as one of the materials for building ATP if possible because it has other functions that are really, really important. Fats also have other functions that are really, really important. Carbohydrates are important for energy production, fast acting, easy transfer at rest. Ingested carbohydrates are also easily stored in our muscles and our liver. So through ingestion and digestion, carbohydrates can be transferred into the blood really, really easily and quite easily stored, and that storage can be broken down, and glycolysis can happen quite quickly. So if carbohydrates are primary energy production space, fats are a slow fuel source for oxidative production of ATP, but they also build our cell membranes. We use fats to build hormones. We use fats to help transfer some key fat-soluble micronutrients like vitamin D, E, K, and A. And fats as triglycerides also provide a big fuel depository, so we can store long-term energy in the space of triglycerides in our fatty tissues and our fat cells really easily. And that's really important for survival. And this fatty tissue can also help us regulate our temperature and keep us warm. And proteins are used to build structure, to help build the body, build enzymes, build hormones, neurotransmitters, transport proteins. So if you remember back into HAP, we talked about protein channels within a cell membrane that can either open and close based on shape and eating ATP, or just opening up a space for certain things. Those are made of proteins. And if you remember our immune system, and we talked about antibodies, the body responding to infection and creating these protein antibodies which can support our immune system. So protein's really important as well. Okay, question 7, the fundamental biochemical relationship between energy coming in, so that's anything that we consume, energy coming in, because remember we can only transfer it to something else, so we need to bring it in, and the balance between energy out, so that's the energy that we burn to stay alive, to move, to function. This is known as energy balance. And that balance, in terms of energy in and energy out, is quite a simple concept to understand. If we can match either of those or manipulate either of those, we can change the structure or the mass of our body. So the question here is, describe how an individual's weight would change based on the manipulation of calories in, calories out. So let's look at the first one. We've got an energy balance. Energy in, or calories eaten, is matched with energy out, or calories burned. You will maintain weight. Okay, so if you are maintaining weight, calories in, calories out is balanced. If calories in is higher than your calories out, then you are in an energy excess and your mass will go up. On the flip side, if our energies in is lower than our energy out, or calories burned, then you're now what's called an energy deficit, and your mass will start to come down. Now, as I said, this concept of energy balance is quite a simple one. In and out, if it's balanced, everything is the same. However, what makes things complicated is both sides of the scale are influenced by multiple factors at the same time, making this a dynamic concept. So it's a little bit like the whole homeostasis system that we learned about in HAP. Things are constantly coming out or coming in and being moved around and changing, which makes that scale really hard to keep balanced at times. So if you think about a seesaw, right? We understand that if both sides of the weight are the same, then it's balanced. If a bigger kid gets on one, it goes down. A bigger kid gets on the other, it goes down. That's a simple idea, but what if you had kids jumping on and off at different times, different weights without warning, on and off, on and off? It would be pretty tricky to maintain that balance. Heavy kid jumps off, you're trying to get a heavier one to come on, this one hops off, so there's this constant battle. So that's why energy balance, although a simple concept, is dynamic and pretty tricky to balance. So the question here is, what are some of these factors that influence both calories in, or what we eat, and calories out, energy burnt? And this is a really nice infographic to summarize it. The bold writing is there's 4 on the left, 4 on the right. And you could even reflect on this a little bit yourself, and if you've ever battled with trying to manipulate this scale, to just reflect on this and be like, okay, this is why it's so tricky. So if we think about energy coming in, so the food that we eat, one is appetite. So how full and hungry we feel at different times. And that's also regulated by hormones, and hormones can be manipulated by lots of different things. The food that we actually consume, so what do we have available? What does it taste like? How much energy is in that piece of food? How much or little sleep we have can affect how much food we consume. Our socioeconomic status, so how much does it cost to feed ourselves, our family, and how does that influence what we can eat? And then cultural influences. Calories absorbed, so number 3. So that's influenced by things like micronutrient and macronutrient intake. So what is the quality of our food, how we prepare our food, our age, our personal gut microbiome, so the bacteria that we have in our gut, and that's again influenced by lots of different things. Health status, so if you're sick on antibiotics, for example, that's going to affect your microbiome. So there's lots of things that affect each other within each of these factors. And then energy status, so how much energy you have available. And then we've got psychological factors, so that's how we think, how we're feeling, influenced by stress, our mindset, perceived control, self-esteem, and also can be affected by sleep quality. And then if we go, that's just one side of the seesaw. If we go on to the other side of the seesaw, energy out. So we're trying to manage things like our basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate. So that's how much energy do we actually burn at rest. And that's influenced by things like how big we are, what tissues we have, hormonal status, which can change daily, our dieting history. So if you have a history of fluctuating between losing weight and putting on weight, and how quickly that happens, that can impact your basal metabolic rate. Genetic factors, you can't choose your parents, so some of that is genetic. We all have those friends who it seems like they can just eat anything and never put on weight. They're not superhuman, they just may have a really high metabolic rate at rest. Health status can also affect energy out. Sleep quality, which is a recurring theme, and then age, which unfortunately we cannot change. Energy burn through exercise, so this is the exercise that we do each day, each week, but that can be influenced by our ability to exercise, how hard we exercise, how long, how often, the type that we do. So resistance training compared to cardiovascular conditioning is going to influence energy out, your environment, your hormonal status, and sleep quality. And then the next one is energy burned by non-exercise activity. So this is physical activity that you do outside of exercise. So that's generally related to things like the jobs that you do, the hobbies that you do. So if you're generally active for your job or you have active hobbies, this can increase how much energy you burn through non-exercise activity. Again, health status, energy status. So if you're not feeling motivated and are not moving, then that's going to decrease this amount of energy. It's called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and it can actually change based on calories in. So the body's awesome at trying to maintain balance. So if you overconsume calories, your body can actually subconsciously increase how active you are. So that's like fidgeting and moving around. If you go into a calorie deficit, then your body will actually subconsciously slow down how active you are and maybe make you feel less motivated to be active. So that's why when you're dieting, sometimes that could feel like you start to lose progress. Some of it is because you're actually become less active. And a strategy at the moment around that is the whole 10,000 steps idea. The point of the 10,000 steps is not that it's a magic number, it's that 10,000 steps is a really good guide to saying to yourself, I've been pretty active today. If you don't hit 10,000 steps, it means it's a pretty low activity day. And then the last one is energy burned through metabolizing food, and I think this is called thermic effect of food, or TEF. You might have heard of it before. Some macronutrients take more energy to break down. Protein has a high TEF, and fiber as a part of carbohydrates has a high TEF. So if you eat a diet that has a good amount of protein and a good amount of fiber, you can increase the metabolic rate of what it costs to process those foods. So cutting the skins off vegetables and fruits actually decreases some of that fiber intake. So keeping it on, probably a good idea. So if you think about the whole clean eating, if you're looking at whole foods, meat and vegetables, you're increasing protein, increasing fiber, and that's probably a good thing to be doing. Okay, team, so I've reached the last slide. What I'll do is just give you an overview of the exam. So we've got 16 questions. It's like the previous one. 10 questions are multiple choice, all worth 1 mark each. Then we have 5 questions that are short answer. 2 of those questions are worth 2 to 3 marks, and they will require you to Dropbox and drag and drop. And then the last 3 in the short answer questions, also worth 2 to 3 marks, will require you to write some stuff down. And then the last question, question 16, is this understanding of the 3 pathways the body uses to regenerate ATP. So we're looking at ATP PCR system, the glycolytic system, and the oxidative system. And these 4 PowerPoints will, if you've got an answer for all of these, or discussion around all of these, then you'll be sweet. So what fuels are utilized at each pathway? So how is ATP regenerated at the ATP PCR space, the glycolytic space, and oxidative space? How quick and how much does each pathway regenerate ATP? This is similar to a couple of questions previous, where I'm just looking at things like super fast, fast, slow, small or very small amounts, and then large amounts. Okay, so I'm not looking for actual numbers, just comparative to each other, how quick and how much. And then how long can each pathway sustain ATP production? So we're looking at, if we're exercising at as hard as we can, what does the ATP PCR system look like in terms of sustainability? Up to 10 seconds. Glycolytic system can maintain high exercise intensity for around 90 seconds. Oxidative system can maintain moderate to low intensity for 2 hours and longer, depending on how intense an exercise is. You give examples, so 10-second 100-meter sprint, our 90 seconds, we're probably looking at like a 400-meter run, and then a marathon for the oxidative system. What is produced by each pathway? So ATP is produced, yes, but there's also things like heat is produced when we split ATP. Lactate or pyruvate and fermented pyruvate produces lactate by the glycolytic system. When we use that in the oxidative system, CO2 is produced. So to metabolize lactate, we produce a lot of CO2. So that's why CO2 production goes up massively when we have high levels of lactate in our system. So we're going to have to talk about some of those products, both ATP byproducts, meaning we can use them later, and waste products. How do we get rid of some of that would be awesome as well. So having some notes around this would be great. That's it, team. Best of luck. It's a 1-hour exam. You've got plenty of time. Have some notes set up. Remember, it's to be done by yourself. Trust in the mahi you've done in preparation. You'll all be awesome. It's the last one. After this, a bit of downtime. Enjoy your break. And hopefully I'll catch up with everybody at some point moving forward.